Hi everyone, this is John from Davisynth, and today I'm going to be doing an overview of ripple delay, what it is, how can you get it, how to use it, tips and tricks. So let's start with ripple delay itself. You can get it from the Davisynth website. It comes in two flavors. There's the free version and the pro version. Now this video is going to focus mainly on the free version. The pro version has a few more bells and whistles, but I really want people to try out the free version. It is a super powerful piece of software. When you go to the download page, you don't need to enter an email or anything. You can just click one of these two links here, and it'll just let you download and install the software from there. Now, once you have ripple delay in your DAW, you'll open it and it will look like this. This is the default preset. Let's take a listen. So it's a pretty typical delay sound. We got some interesting stuff going on here with the pitches, the pitch modulation, and we'll talk about that later. But let's just get into the basics of it. So I'm gonna start with a new patch. So I'm gonna go to Menu, and I'm gonna go to the Factory Presets, and I'm gonna hit Blank Slate. This is just gonna sort of zero out the plugin. If we listen to it, we're just getting the dry sound. Now, ripple delay is a multi-tap delay. That means you get to select the delay pattern. It's similar to the way that you would program drums in the drum machine. So from these panels here, we're going to edit our delay pattern in the pattern view. One thing first I want to check is to make sure that my dry wet is not set to 0. Since it's set to 50%, we will hear something. So the way that ripple delay works is if we play this first tap, you won't notice anything. That's because this tap, the time here, lines up perfectly with the original signal. If we put a tap just a quarter note away, we hear two. We hear the thing twice. And then we can keep adding taps and click and drag to add more. So you can hear 8 in total, 7 of which were delayed, and the first one was just that original dry sample. So if I bring my dry wet in the globals here to 100%, you'll only hear 7. You'll see on the bottom left that I'm playing the piano. You'll hear a delay, and then you'll hear the 7 taps sort of go by. So you only heard 7 there, and that's because we only have 7 enabled. Now the pattern view is divided into left and right channels, L and R. And so if you wanted to do sort of a mono delay, you would just have both your left and your right enabled for each tap. But we can do sort of a ping pong effect by just having the taps go back and forth. And I'm going to bring my dry wet back to about 50%. So as you could hear, we had a nice pattern. Now you can swap these if you want, pressing the swap button. You can also randomize the pattern. And you can clear the pattern. So now you don't hear anything. That's the pattern view. And what you've been seeing me play with is the levels here in the global view. So dry wet controls the amount of dry signal. So that's the signal coming into the plugin and mixes it with the signal that the effects portion of the plugin is producing. Now if you have a bunch of delay taps, kind of these echoes on top of each other, what's going to happen is the sound can build up like a lot, and that can cause clipping. So before being outputted, the sound passes through a compressor, and the compressor just makes sure that the sound just doesn't clip. And so you can control the threshold and the slope of the compressor here. Typically, I'll just leave the threshold at 100% and the slope at 50%. That just kind of is like a nice easing off, and it just kind of stays at maximum of 0 dB. But you can do this. And I found that for some creative effects, you actually might want a negative slope. It sounds really interesting, and it's like a weird thing to think of for your compressor, but you can actually have a negative slope. So in this case, louder sounds would actually like be quieter in the output than what they were in the input. So it's not like saturating it, it's like actually pulling it down. So that's a neat thing you can do. But let's just keep this at 50 and then just keep it there. And so this is the levels tab of the globals window. Globals is sort of things that are affecting the plugin as a whole. And so we have our globals, our levels, of course, are affecting the plugin as a whole. The taps are also affecting the plugin as a whole. The ripple is also affecting the plugin as a whole. When you see stuff over here in the automation and ripple sections, these will not be affecting the plugin as a whole. So let's start with the taps. The global tap time is sort of giving your BPM, or at least in reference to your BPM, what each of these notes is. So right now we have this set to be a quarter note. So each one of these is one quarter note. We can make them 1/8 note reference. And so what you'll hear when I play with this is we have a much faster versus, you can even make these much longer delays. Or much shorter. So that one, you couldn't even tell that it was like 4 echoes. It sort of becomes sort of a reverby type of thing. And that's something that ripple delay is really good at. So you find your reference. You can do hertz if you want to select in something like milliseconds, you know. If you want like a really fast one. And you can also do beats. And on the Pro version, let me show you this. I'll pull up the Pro version really quick. You can select triplet time. So triplet time, just give it a second to load. Sometimes my plugins, yeah, okay. So you can select the triplet time, and this will just reference it to a triplet. Now, in the pattern view, you can also select between beat and triplet. Right now we have it set to beat because that's a limitation of the free version. In the Pro version, you can bring it to triplet, and now your pattern, rather than just being like quarter notes and eighth notes, it's actually quarter notes and I guess eighth note triplets, right? So you have 6 notes for every 4 quarter notes. That can really change the sound of things. So I'm just gonna play the default preset here with the quarter note pattern and then also the triplet pattern. And I'm actually just gonna bring the dry wet up a bit. And then we'll do triplet. And actually, one thing that might be better to illustrate this is by having the triplets on the left and the quarter notes on the right. So you get that da 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 da. Whereas with just the beat, and so that can be something that adds like a really nice, not necessarily flavor, but like a nice rhythm to your delay sound. So anyway, going back to the free version over here, the next thing that you'll see is this amplitude, frequency, and width. Now what are these? These are things that you'll see in a normal delay, right? is you have your feedback amplitude, your feedback frequency if there's a filter on it, which in this case there is, and your feedback sort of filter width. Now in this case, what the feedback is doing is when our delay taps get to the end here, they go back to the beginning. The sound from there gets sort of circled back to the beginning, and it's going to circle back to the beginning with this amplitude, this frequency, and this width. So what I'm going to do is set, the beats actually, I'm going to set like a really short pattern. And you could hear that it's being circulated around. If I set the amplitude to 0, so basically we get no global feedback, that's it. The taps you see on the screen are what you get. But if you have this amplitude set to something like 100%, and we'll set the frequency to 50, so it's kind of in the middle, and the width to 100. That's just kind of like playing the same sound, and it's going to go on to infinity. So that was our global taps. Cover the global levels. Let's also cover the global ripple. Actually, scrap that. I'm going to do that after we get to the actual automation and ripple. This is the meat of the plugin. So automation is one of the core features that distinguishes ripple delay against like other multi-tap delays. Now, I love all of the multi-tap delays on the market. There's some really cool plugins out there. I've just found that when you have to edit each individual tap's sort of like frequency, bandwidth, amplitude, when you have a bunch of sliders, like one slider for each tap, it's just like really hard to quickly and like sort of staying in the flow to come up with a sound. Like, if I want my taps to sort of decay in volume, I want to be able to just draw out that decay, like physically, like literally on screen. Or if I want the filter to change, I want to be able to do that. So let's do that here. I'm just going to make a random pattern. That's kind of a weird pattern. Let's do a different random one. Sure, that sounds good. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our amplitude modulation, which you can see it says amount 100%. That's really important. And our center is 0. And I'm just going to do this. Now, what I'm doing right now is I'm saying that our reference point, if this is like the bottom here is 0, so you can see this line is like sort of what the actual amplitude is, moving it down, and I'm having the modulation start at 0, and then whatever this curve is what the amplitude gets set to there. If we change our center, there's sort of a vertical offset. Okay? You can do negative amount as well, has the opposite effect. So look at this graph here and this graph here. And sort of this line that you see is going to sort of tell you what that is. The amount is really useful if you want to automate sort of the amount of automation. So automate within your DAW or control it from a MIDI parameter, something. The amount of the delay automation within ripple delay. Okay? But if you just want to make it so that the curve matches the curve that you see here, set the center to 0 and the amount to 100%. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to make a decay. Okay? So what that means is that the taps earlier in time, so the taps on the left here, are going to start at 100% amplitude, and they're going to decay, sort of exponential decay, down to 0 amplitude. Let's give a listen. Actually, I'm going to do wet only, and I'm just going to play staccato notes. So you could hear that decay there. By dragging this control point, we can also change how that decay happens. So there you could hear that they were staying near 100% for longer and then decaying relatively quickly to 0. You can do something in between. You can also double click this to turn it into a straight line. And we can make sort of different patterns. So for example, we can have it be at 100%, then instantly drop to 0, and then kind of make its way back to 100. Let's try that. Actually, what I'm going to do is make it stay around 0 for longer. Right? So you heard that? That's kind of cool. You can't do that with other delays. That's a multi-tap delay feature. And so it gives you this sort of longer echo effect. So you have your delay taps, that's your echo, but then you also have this echo here that you've created where, yeah, you get sound here and then there's a pause and then that sound starts to play again. And that's really neat. And that's one of the great things about ripple delay is that doing stuff like that, you don't have to care about, 32 taps for left and right. You don't have to care about them, right? You can just draw out sort of what you want to hear, and that's what you're going to hear. So that's awesome. You can do that with the amplitude as well as the filter frequency, which will do the same thing. We'll set the center to 0 and the amount to 100%. You can do a similar cool thing where and actually I'm going to get rid of that crazy amplitude stuff. You can double click the points to remove them. And I'm just going to have the amplitude sort of fade out. So now we're just playing with the filter frequency. Oops, that's the bandwidth, the frequency. So you can hear the filter sort of sweeping down and then back up. Now, it wasn't an aggressive sweep sound. The reason for that was that the bandwidth was still relatively high. So I'm actually just going to take my amount to 100 and actually I'm just going to control the bandwidth here sort of graphically. Right? So as you could hear, we had this cool frequency cutting effect, and we can just play similar games where we just, have fun with it. You can draw whatever you want. Now this is another difference between the free version and the pro version. The free version does not let you add as many control points as you want. You can do a lot of stuff with just 3. It's kind of like an ADSR type of thing, right? But in the pro version, you can get just as crazy as you want with it. And people make some really, really complex sounds. So, we have the frequency, we have the bandwidth. You also have panning. This one works slightly differently. So, it wouldn't make sense to have panning start from the center, from the bottom and just move in one direction. So it actually starts from the center. When you change your amount, it goes there. You can center the panning still, but when you change your amount, it's not just gonna push this in one direction. So you can see when I do this, it's yeah. So I can make my panning move from left to right. And this is kind of hard to hear when we have randomized ripples that are already kind of giving us that effect. Let's do this. So you can get these really cool panning effects. Now, if you've used spiral delay at all, you remember that spiral delay sort of is able to shift the left and right. That algorithm works a little bit differently. This one is just it's kind of like automating the panning. Literally, that's what it's doing. So this gives you really good control, and you can make some cool effects with this. So if you don't want to make sort of just a hard either full left, full right pattern here in the pattern editor, you can actually do it in your panning. And that way you can get sort of these sweeps. You can be a bit more creative with it. But you have both options. Now, I'm going to go back to random. I'm actually going to set the amount to 0% here, so our panning is not getting affected by the automation. And let's find a random one that... Okay, this one sounds okay. We're getting some really weird ones there, but that's what happens with randomness. I'm just gonna set my bandwidth. Yeah, we're at 0 amount, and we'll just set it to a constant amount. And similarly with frequency, no, actually let's keep the frequency sweep a little bit. In this case, I will be a bit less aggressive with it. We'll just do one of these, and we'll have the frequency sort of in the middle. And actually, I do think I want to increase my bandwidth, or at least have it sort of fade down a bit. And so you can see here, this is a case where I would use the center and not actually move the control points, because you might like the way that your bandwidth is like decreasing over time, like you have a really pretty shape, but you just want to add a little bit more bandwidth sort of overall. That's what this is useful for. Or maybe you want the bandwidth to get affected a little bit less by it. That's what the amount is useful for. Or you want to like make it negative. You can see in this plot here, when we set the negative amount, we're actually going from a small bandwidth to a big bandwidth. So you can get cool stuff like that versus the positive version. Either way, there's just so much to play with. Now, ripples. Ripples are super cool. So let's start with let's do the amplitude ripple first. What I'm going to do is just put this up to 100% and put this up to 100%. What we can see is our graph is moving. Like, that's weird, right? And so what this is a modulation that gets applied to all of our delay taps, okay? But they're sort of, the modulation moves across the delay taps, sort of spatially or like in time, you know? And as a result, you get these waves of modulation. Ripples are super cool because they add, it's like tap to tap variability that, you know, other types of modulation might not do. You know, if you shift the amplitude and it just affects all of your taps equally, it's going to sound like you're just pulling the amplitude knob, you know, your gain knob on like up and down for the whole effect, and it just kind of sounds weird. Whereas if you do it just on the taps, you know, individually, different taps are sort of getting highlighted, but it doesn't have that same effect of like pulling the entire effect up and down. It's probably better if I just show you. So what I'm going to do in the global ripple settings, I'm going to set my rate, and we'll just go by hertz. We'll set like a relatively fast one. Now the wavelength here is sort of the physical wavelength of this wave that we see. And I'm actually going to drag down my amplitude so that my wave isn't peaking. Let's listen to this. If I set my wavelength like this, and also one other thing is there's a global ripple amount. So right now it's set to 50%, just set it to 100%. So now my amplitude will get affected within like one full span of this graph here. So if we listen to this, it's going to sound really aggressive. Now, think of what I said before. If we set this wavelength so that it's small, you can hear that we're still applying that same like amplitude up and down, but because it's affecting these taps at like different times, it still leads to this cool modulation, but it doesn't feel like the entire plugin is just going woo woo up and down. And by playing with the wavelength, you can sort of have it so that different groups of the taps are getting stuff at different times. And there's just so many things you can do like that. So we can play the same game with the frequency. This is going to have an interesting effect because you can see here that it's kind of modulating the frequency up and down. I'm actually going to decrease my rate. And we can also do the same thing, making the wavelength really big just to highlight what this is doing. Actually, maybe the amplitude we'll just not do. And also the bandwidth, just to really highlight this. I'm going to set it to a small bandwidth. Yeah, that sounds really cool. You're listening to this? So it's going like woo, woo. That sounds really, really cool. I'm also going to just pull the bandwidth down a little bit here so we get like more of that like woo effect. And because that like global-ish thing is kind of annoying, we're just going to do it so that the wavelength's kind of small. That sounds awesome. Like it's just like a cool way to add modulation to your echoes. You know, and obviously you don't have to be as aggressive. Here we're pulling from like the very highest to the very lowest. And so what we could do is just make it so that we have like smaller ripples. We could also play with the bandwidth ripple. Right, see what's happening here is because of the way that the bandwidth gets added. I'm going to make this a lot slower just so it's easier to see. So right here at the beginning, we're getting really thin kind of at low frequencies, and then at high frequencies, the bandwidth gets really big. Now, by changing the phase of the bandwidth, we can actually do the opposite. We can make it so it gets thicker at low frequencies and thinner at high frequencies. This is just changing the relative phase of, and you can see this in the graph view, it's changing the relative phase of these ripples. So let's listen to this. Maybe this is a little bit slow for us to actually be able to hear it. So it's just a really cool way to add a lot of variability. Now, I'm going to stop these ripples, and we're going to do one last thing. And that's one of the coolest things about ripple delay I'm about to show you. And that's the time modulation. So let's just get ourselves set up with just like a simple... Okay. Let's do some time modulation. So just like the others, we can just add ripples to the tap delay time. And you can actually see it, it's pretty subtle. On the graph view here, you can see these taps sort of moving back and forth relative to each other. That is their tap delay time, like their actual, like in time. That's what's happening to these taps relative to each other. And when you wiggle something in time, you know, you wiggle its time, you're actually going to affect its frequency. It's sort of, it's like the Doppler effect a little bit. You know, when a train's coming towards you, it's like higher pitch, and then when it goes away from you, it's lower pitch. Similar things happening here. So let's have a listen. So I just, as a comparison, we took this and if we add that to the dry, or if we add some dry to that, really cool because it's like it's widening the sound like, spectrally. So it sounds a little bit like a unison type of effect, and it's also adding enough sort of variation to the taps themselves that I don't know, in my mind I don't hear it as much of as a delay. And if we just bring the ripple amount to 0, right, I can tell that it's a delay. But this, I think, smears it enough. It's sort of more of an, I don't want to say reverby, but it's adding to the whole sort of ambiance of the track. Right, so like maybe at the end there when there's just a few taps left, you can hear it, the individual taps, but when you're playing like that, it's like really making this sort of ambient effect. And then if we combine that with the global feedback, we can get sort of this like infinity modulated sort of like really cool sort of like, I don't know, it's like really cool. I'd say it's sort of between like a traditional delay and your reverb type of thing. And I've in my own production, I have pretty much completely switched. Well, I don't want to say completely switched. Reverb has its place, but I found that it colors the sound, and like it's changing the frequencies a little bit, and it might sound really bright, and you can't really cut that reverb. It's like it's either like bright or muddy, or it like makes it sound like it's in a tin can, whereas this doesn't. This type of effect doesn't really affect the timbre of the sound itself. It's still like really clear, it comes through there. So yeah, I've switched to just sort of like adding a modulated ripple delay on my sounds and actually just using that to create sort of space in the back of my mix. Super useful tip. But yeah, this pretty much covers everything in this version of ripple delay. Now in the settings here, let's just talk about that. You can change the UI scale, right? So now 50%, go back to, you can go to 125%, 100%, and you could save these defaults so that every time you load the settings or you load the plugin, this is sort of like what your default settings come to. Change the delay sampling as well as the effect of what happens when you change the delay time, like should it mute and clear the buffer or not. These are things I talked about in the ripple delay 1.3 update video, but the scaling is going to be helpful. I found that it was helpful for Mac users with Retina displays, so people with like I guess the MacBook Air people, they have a small laptop, but so like their UI is pretty big. Basically what was happening was that ripple delay was taking up like more than 100% of their screen, so that's obviously a problem. So you can scale it to 50%. Yeah, Mac users, this probably won't affect Windows users as much. I found that Windows scaling, it works differently than Mac, and it works pretty well. Let's take a look at our presets. So this is a big one. When you download ripple delay, you're going to see user, and you're not going to see factory presets. If you click update factory presets, what that does is it just pulls from the website, there's a Davison's website has some presets on it. It gets those presets and it installs them. There's not many. I'm hoping to add more when I get time. I've been developing the plugin. I'm also doing a PhD right now, so that doesn't help with the amount of time I have to develop this. But there's some presets there. There's a bit more presets in the Pro version. You can take a look at that. Actually, I need to enable. If we do update factory presets, yeah, you can see you get all these. So let's take a look at some of the presets. We have a big high pass fade. So what this is doing is just taking your sort of dry sound and just sort of nudging it into that high pass filter territory. So blank slate, which we've played around with. Passing subway, this one was just an interesting one. Like, you know when you're on a train, you hear that like anyway, that's what I heard. At least the trains in Boston do that. Pitch shifting high pass fade. What this is doing is taking sort of maximum filter width at the beginning, and then it like really squeezes it, low passes it, right? So it's like you'll hear a couple of like really full spectrum and low pass, and then it like goes and does like a sweep across the high pass. Let's check this out. And if we want to be a bit more aggressive with that sweep, we can actually just like nudge this down so that the bandwidth goes a lot smaller. So like that's so cool. You don't hear that with other types of delays, and ripple delay just makes it like so easy to make all these different things. It's awesome. Similar idea, pitch shifting low pass fade. Just take it and just instead of making it go high pass, we make it do low pass. Let's play it with like a higher note just so that we can really emphasize like the fact that it's low passing it. Actually, wait, a lower note might be better for this. You can play around with it. I find that the high pass fade is more audible. I mean, higher frequencies are generally more audible. Makes sense. Small room with width. Now, this is an example of using ripple delay and also the time modulation together with it to make sort of like a small room reverb. Because room reverbs, like when you're in a room and you clap, there's some smearing, but you don't have nearly as many surfaces that you're reflecting off of compared to, say, in like a forest. So a room reverb will typically be very short. Now in this case, if we look at our taps, we can see that's a delay time of 1/32 note. This just ended up sounding pretty neat. And you also see that the tap delay time is changing. Adding that variation really helps with these reverby type of effects, stuff where you don't want it to like sound a certain way, you know? It's kind of interesting. It's like rather than coloring the sound, it's like you color it something different every time a new note is played, you know, like so that way our brains don't pick up on the fact that it's like colored a certain way. It's just like the random variation or semi-random as a result of this time here just makes it so you can't really discern that it's like going through an effect. And that's a really good thing. If you can't notice the effect, it means the effect is doing its job. Unless if you're using it artistically, but you know. And this one does add a lot of width. Let's bring the width a little bit down. Right, so you might not notice that if you're listening to the song. One interesting thing, I haven't tried this, is actually if you go into Hertz, and if you were just to like modulate this a little bit, be pretty interesting. We have this demo I made of the new algorithm. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it for these presets. I'll go through the pro presets really quick. So, factory presets, let's go to blank slate. All right. So you can hear with the pro version, we really get like access to these more creative ways of using sort of like the frequency, bandwidth, amplitude sweeps. So that's a really cool thing. Digital Sweep Canyon 2. Yeah, there's 2 of them. So this is an example of that thing I was talking about earlier, how we have these individual delay taps that are happening relatively quickly, but through our automation, we can sort of create our own big echoes, right? Super cool. In that case, you get just like one more echo. Digital Sweep Canyon, the OG. What was the difference? Okay, I think the only difference between these two is that this one just sort of like brings it down, up a lot, and then down. And I think I just couldn't decide which one was better that I wanted to include. Like they both sounded kind of neat, and so I just included them both. And then you can obviously change the tap delay time. So you can change it to a 30-second note. Actually, let's change the dry wet. So that's some crazy modulation. This thing's awesome. Fuzzy blanket. Get some interesting chords going on here. Some neat stuff. I've been trying to learn a little bit of music theory. I took a course on music theory. I had homeworks on it that I wrote a computer program to just like tell me what the next chord is, or I just put the notes in and it tells me what that chord is in that key. Needless to say, I sort of automated away all of the learning music theory that I would do. Just skipping through these different presets. These are the ones that are the same in both versions. Sloppy Pulse. This one's fun. So this one is actually, rather than using and like leaning into the fact that you can have like different modulation on different taps, this one is like really like it goes the other way. It's like, okay, let's just make this like big like global like effect of the taps. And like in the amplitude here, you can see that the automation, right? It's like full amplitude except for these regions here. And in these regions, we're just going to add just like, this is like where the modulation is going to happen. So it just sounds really cool. Sloppy Pulse, the best. Small room with width again. Stereo polyrhythm. Just out of curiosity, let's see what happens if we make the pattern go from triplet, to beat. I don't know why I'm thinking of like every scene where there's like a newspaper being printed in like a movie. Anyway, we get this like polyrhythmic effect with like the 2 and the 3, or the 4 and the 6, you know. This is a cool one. And then you can always just, if it's like a little bit intense, just go low on the dry wet. And then if we wanted to make this sound wider, like frequency wider, right? We can actually, now this is one thing we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to bring our amounts up of the rest of the stuff. And then maybe bring our bandwidth amount down and our frequency amount down. Neat effect. Viscous atmosphere. This one I can only describe as vibes. This is like such a cool one. It just like, it'll like soften whatever you're playing. I think it sounds awesome. And I think what's making a lot of that is the fact that you have this like sort of lower frequency, like lower mid frequencies are being emphasized throughout the whole thing, but they're sort of dancing around. So you get like a lot of width, and that's what's getting like the atmospheric there. But we don't have, you know, we have 50% dry wet. If we just set it to 100% wet, you can hear that it's just sort of like a, you know, frequency limited delay. But then when you add both, it's just vibes. Let's see what happens if we shift the frequency on this. It's gonna be fun. So in this case, it's sounding like our atmosphere is a little bit less goopy, less viscous. That thing still sounds sweet though. Let's go the other way. Oh, I like that a lot. That sounds awesome. Wobbly, crunchy width. This one I remember is a fun one. So I'm just gonna play just dry. Right, we got like a very proper piano sound, and then like we're using a delay effect. Like this is a delay effect, and we're using it to just completely change the vibe of the piano. Like that's awesome. I love this thing. Like, okay, I know like very biased as the developer, but also this thing's awesome. Like oh, we can make it very like official. Hi, I'm Mr. Piano. I'm official, and then like silly piano with just like one preset. And so that's done by just like really leaning into this like fast like time modulation, going pretty high pitched here. You know, those like high frequencies are leading to, you know, you're basically taking a lot of the bass note out of the piano, so like that fundamental, and you're sort of just like wiggling around these like high frequencies. It sounds so cool. This was sent from a user. But that one is not included in the factory presets, so I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, ripple delay. Ripple delay is awesome. Like, I don't know what to say. It's such a fun plugin. It's like just a completely different take on what delay can be used for. Because delay is like this really part, sort of this like, you know, in between reverb, like filtering, shaping the sound. And then when you add modulation on it, you can just get some serious magic to happen, completely changing the vibe of your sounds. It's awesome. So yeah, I like heavily encourage you, check out ripple delay. Again, ripple delay free. You can just download it. Like it's a download file. You don't need to enter an email. I'm not collecting it from marketing, right? Like don't worry. There's the pro version. I would love if you really like this plugin and you want to just like go full creative on it, check out the pro version. It's awesome. It's available for purchase. But yeah, definitely check out the free version. It's super powerful. It's what we've been focusing on for most of this video, and it's going to get you some really cool sounds and hopefully change the way that you like think about delay and like what delay is and how it can be used. It's like so cool. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and like staying through this video. I know this was like a very long video, very unscripted. It's actually, I have my script in front of me for what I wanted to say for this, and then went completely off script. So when we like delved into the presets, but yeah. And then if you have any questions about ripple delay, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me at john@davisynth.com, and yeah, just any questions, comments, feedback, anything you'd like added. Most of the feature additions, actually like in the newer versions, pretty much all the feature additions are things that were either ideas that people who use ripple delay had, or things that people who use ripple delay like were like, hey, this is broken, change it, you know, fix it. And so I'm super happy to roll out updates and additions and just requests and just like to tackle those. I really love developing this plugin. This is a really fun plugin to develop, and it's something that's been like, it's just been a fun project. So check it out. I would be really grateful. But yeah, thank you for watching and have a good day.